In this video for the Beacon Hill Dollhouse construction, I'm going to go over Section C, first floor staircase. And just like the other sections, I start by looking at the restore and prepare, locate the individual pieces out of the sheets, cut them out, sand the edges, and then, finish them in the way, that is so desired. So in my case, I debated how I wanted this to appear, but I ultimately made the decision that I was going to stain in polyurethane the entire staircase set. So I wanted it to appear as though this was some original old woodwork that was part of this Victorian house. So looking at the pieces, I realized a lot of it was going to be visible from different angles. So a lot of it needed to be stained and polyurethaned on both sides. So it was a long process to go through this, because every point that you stain or polyurethane, you do have to wait for it to dry. And so since I do multiple steps of polyurethane, there's a lot of waiting to get this thing completed before I was even ready to assemble. As you start assembling the pieces, the beginning steps interlock actually pretty nicely. But then as you move further into the assembly, you realize a lot of the pieces are just butted up next to another piece and then glued. So sometimes it feels like this thing is not as sturdy as you would like it to be, but it will get more sturdy as you keep adding more pieces to the assembly. As you go along, be sure to try to keep the edges as square and level as possible. Eventually this whole assembly is going to have to fit into the dollhouse, next to a wall, up to a ceiling. So you need to keep things as square and level as possible, so that way it's going to fit nicely once you get it into the dollhouse itself. I would use quite a bit of tape in the assembly while I was letting the glue dry. And sometimes I would need like opposite forces so that it would keep the thing square and plumb in the drying process. Because if I put tape one way, it would put too much pressure and take it out of level in another way. So sometimes I would need to put opposite forces in the taping process to make this thing hold up square as possible. And I would use various things. Like I had this tub that I had my paint in for the primer paint, and I would use it for propping up the base of the staircase as I was building up the assembly. So as I was putting on the treads and risers onto the staircase assembly, I found that I was actually missing one of the risers. And I looked through all of the sheets and could not find this. And of course, as I mentioned in an earlier video, the sheets don't necessarily line up with the schematics. So even though the schematic showed all the pieces there, and it separated the treads and risers, the actual sheets were different. And so anyway, I was missing one of them, and ultimately just fashioned another riser that fit where I needed it to. And I used it as on the very first step into the staircase at the first level. And this one was a little smaller anyway, and less visible, so I could get away with not using some of the wood that actually came from the kit. One of the steps asks you to pre-assemble the staircase trim that goes on the lower level. So with this, you have to put it into a 90-degree angle. So this can actually be a little bit difficult to do without something there to put it on. So I found a tool that I had previously used to put knobs onto cabinet drawers, and this had like a little 90-degree notch around the edges so it would line up with the drawers. And so I put my pieces in those notches to create that 90-degree angle, so that way while the glue was drying, it would dry in this nice 90-degree angle. After you have the staircase pre-assembled, the next step is actually installing it into the house. So I did go ahead and install it into the house just as prescribed in the instructions. But I will point out that this can cause some problems a little bit later. So as you put it in there, you are butting it up right next to the walls. So I did not do anything further to prepare the walls other than having my primer coat there. So later, when I start to finish the interior and you get all the walls up and you've enclosed the space, it's very difficult to get around the staircase, and do any kind of different wall treatments. And I knew that this was probably going to be a difficult area, and I had seen other people what they had done. Some people will go ahead and pre-paint or pre-wallpaper, and put something there ahead of time before putting the staircase in. And so this is a smart thing to do if you know what you're going to do at this point in time. But it does take a lot of planning way ahead of where you're currently at in the building process. I, on the other hand, had not made any of those decisions yet about how I wanted to treat the interior. And at the time, I was thinking maybe I'll just leave it in the primer. Maybe this is how I'm going to leave the entire house, just in this yellow. So even though I did try to make a strong effort into creating the pre-assembly of the staircase in a nice square orientation, once I start to put it into the house, I found it did not line up as well as I would have liked it to. There were gaps here and there. So it does require then a little force to get everything settled onto the floor, next to the wall, up to the ceiling. And so this is where, something like the strap clamp came in real handy. So I had this thing wrapped around the entire house, under the body, over the bottom platform of the staircase. And this forced it in a secure spot, while the glue was drying in this particular location. The next phase is applying the railings and trim. And with this, it's mostly just a lot of tape and an occasional clamp. Once this is done, you're going to be encouraged to move on to the next step. See you next time. Thanks for watching.